Biography of world top scientist Charles Darwin. Charles Robert Darwin, the 12th of February 1809 to the 19th of April 1882 was an English naturalist and geologist, best known for his contributions to the science of evolution. He established that all species of life have descended over time from common ancestors, and in a joint publication with Alfred Russel Wallace introduced his scientific theory that this branching pattern of evolution resulted from a process that he called natural selection, in which the struggle for existence has a similar effect to the artificial selection involved in selective breeding. Darwin published his theory of evolution with compelling evidence in his 1859 book On the Origin of Species, overcoming scientific rejection of earlier concepts of transmutation of species. By the 1870s, the scientific community and much of the general public had accepted evolution as a fact. However, many favored competing explanations, and it was not until the emergence of the modern evolutionary synthesis from the 1930s to the 1950s that a broad consensus developed in which natural selection was the basic mechanism of evolution. In modified form, Darwin's scientific discovery is the unifying theory of the life sciences, explaining the diversity of life. Darwin's early interest in nature led him to neglect his medical education at the University of Edinburgh. Instead, he helped to investigate marine invertebrates. Studies at the University of Cambridge, Christ's College, encouraged his passion for natural science. His 5-year voyage on HMS Beagle established him as an eminent geologist whose observations and theories supported Charles Lyell's uniformitarian ideas, and publication of his Journal of the Voyage made him famous as a popular author. Puzzled by the geographical distribution of wildlife and fossils he collected on the voyage, Darwin began detailed investigations and in 1838 conceived his theory of natural selection. Although he discussed his ideas with several naturalists, he needed time for extensive research and his geological work had priority. He was writing up his theory in 1858 when Alfred Russel Wallace sent him an essay that described the same idea, prompting immediate joint publication of both of their theories. Darwin's work established evolutionary descent with modification as the dominant scientific explanation of diversification in nature. In 1871 he examined human evolution and sexual selection in The Descent of Man, and selection in relation to sex, followed by the expression of the emotions in man and animals, 1872. His research on plants was published in a series of books, and in his final book, The Formation of Vegetable Mold, Through the Actions of Worms, 1881, he examined earthworms and their effect on soil. Biography. Early life and education. Charles Robert Darwin was born in Shrewsbury, Shropshire, England, on the 12th of February 1809 at his family's home, the Mount. He was the fifth of 6 children of wealthy society doctor and financier Robert Darwin, and of Susanna Darwin. He was the grandson of 2 prominent abolitionists, Erasmus Darwin on his father's side, and Hosea Wedgwood on his mother's side. Both families were largely Unitarian, though the Wedgwoods were adopting Anglicanism. Robert Darwin, himself quietly a freethinker, had baby Charles baptized in November 1809 in the Anglican St. Chad's Church, Shrewsbury, but Charles and his siblings attended the Unitarian chapel with their mother. The 8-year-old Charles already had a taste for natural history and collecting when he joined the day school run by its preacher in 1817. That July, his mother died. From September 1818, he joined his older brother Erasmus attending the nearby Anglican Shrewsbury School as a boarder. Darwin spent the summer of 1825 as an apprentice doctor, helping his father treat the poor of Shropshire, before going to the University of Edinburgh Medical School, at the time the best medical school in the UK, with his brother Erasmus in October 1825. He found lectures dull and surgery distressing, so neglected his studies. He learned taxidermy in around 40 daily hour-long sessions from John Edmonstone, a freed black slave who had accompanied Charles Waterton in the South American rainforest. In Darwin's second year at the university he joined the Plinian Society, a student natural history group featuring lively debates in which radical democratic students with materialistic views challenged orthodox religious concepts of science. He assisted Robert Edmund Grant's investigations of the anatomy and life cycle of marine invertebrates in the Firth of Forth, and on the 27th of March 1827 presented at the Plinian his own discovery that black spores found in oyster shells were the eggs of a skate leech. One day, Grant praised Lamarck's evolutionary ideas. Darwin was astonished by Grant's audacity, but had recently read similar ideas in his grandfather Erasmus' journals. Darwin was rather bored by Robert Jameson's natural history course, which covered geology, including the debate between Neptunism and Plutonism. He learned the classification of plants, and assisted with work on the collections of the University Museum, one of the largest museums in Europe at the time. Darwin's neglect of medical studies annoyed his father, who shrewdly sent him to Christ's College, Cambridge, to study for a Bachelor of Arts degree as the first step towards becoming an Anglican country parson. As Darwin was unqualified for the tripos, he joined the ordinary degree course in January 1828. He preferred riding and shooting to studying. His cousin William Darwin Fox introduced him to the popular craze for beetle collecting. Darwin pursued this zealously, getting some of his finds published in Stevens' Illustrations of British Entomology. He became a close friend and follower of botany professor John Stevens Henslow and met other leading parson naturalists who saw scientific work as religious natural theology, becoming known to these dons as the man who walks with Henslow. When his own exams drew near, Darwin focused on his studies and was delighted by the language and logic of William Paley's Evidences of Christianity, 1794. In his final examination in January 1831, Darwin did well, coming 10th out of 178 candidates for the ordinary degree. Darwin had to stay at Cambridge until June 1831. He studied Paley's Natural Theology or Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity, first published in 1802, which made an argument for divine design in nature, explaining adaptation as God acting through laws of nature. He read John Herschel's new book, Preliminary Discourse on the Study of Natural Philosophy, 1831, which described the highest aim of natural philosophy as understanding such laws through inductive reasoning based on observation, and Alexander von Humboldt's personal narrative of scientific travels in 1799-1804. Inspired with a burning zeal to contribute, Darwin planned to visit Tenerife with some classmates after graduation to study natural history in the tropics. In preparation, he joined Adam Sedgwick's geology course, then traveled with him in the summer for a fortnight, in order to map strata in Wales. Voyage of the Beagle. After a week with student friends at Barmouth, Darwin returned home on the 29th of August to find a letter from Henslow proposing him as a suitable, if unfinished, gentleman naturalist for a self-funded supernumerary place on HMS Beagle with Captain Robert Fitzroy, more as a companion than a mere collector. The ship was to leave in 4 weeks on an expedition to chart the coastline of South America. Robert Darwin objected to his son's planned 2-year voyage, regarding it as a waste of time, but was persuaded by his brother-in-law, Hosea Wedgwood, to agree to, and fund, his son's participation. Darwin took care to remain in a private capacity to retain control over his collection, intending it for a major scientific institution. After delays, the voyage began on the 27th of December 1831. It lasted almost 5 years. As Fitzroy had intended, Darwin spent most of that time on land investigating geology and making natural history collections, while the Beagle surveyed and charted coasts. He kept careful notes of his observations and theoretical speculations, and at intervals during the voyage his specimens were sent to Cambridge together with letters including a copy of his journal for his family. He had some expertise in geology, beetle collecting and dissecting marine invertebrates, but in all other areas was a novice and ably collected specimens for expert appraisal. Despite suffering badly from seasickness, Darwin wrote copious notes while on board the ship. Most of his zoology notes are about marine invertebrates, starting with plankton collected in a calm spell. On their first stop ashore at St. Jago in Cape Verde, Darwin found that a white band high in the volcanic rock cliffs included seashells. Fitzroy had given him the first volume of Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology, which set out uniformitarian concepts of land slowly rising or falling over immense periods, and Darwin saw things Lyell's way, theorizing and thinking of writing a book on geology. When they reached Brazil, Darwin was delighted by the tropical forest, but detested the sight of slavery. McCormick left the ship at this point, feeling that Darwin had supplanted him as naturalist. The survey continued to the south in Patagonia. They stopped at Bahia Blanca, and in cliffs near Punta Alta Darwin made a major find of fossil bones of huge extinct mammals beside modern seashells, indicating recent extinction with no signs of change in climate or catastrophe. He identified the little-known Megatherium by a tooth and its association with bony armor, which had at first seemed to him to be like a giant version of the armor on local armadillos. The finds brought great interest when they reached England. On rides with gauchos into the interior to explore geology and collect more fossils, Darwin gained social, political and anthropological insights into both native and colonial people at a time of revolution, and learned that two types of rhea had separate but overlapping territories. Further south, he saw stepped plains of shingle and seashells as raised beaches showing a series of elevations. He read Lyell's second volume and accepted its view of centers of creation, of species, but his discoveries and theorizing challenged Lyell's ideas of smooth continuity and of extinction of species. 3 Fuegians on board had been seized during the first Beagle voyage, then during a year in England were educated as missionaries. Darwin found them friendly and civilized, yet at Tierra del Fuego he met miserable, degraded savages, as different as wild from domesticated animals. He remained convinced that, despite this diversity, all humans were interrelated with a shared origin and potential for improvement towards civilization. Unlike his scientist friends, he now thought there was no unbridgeable gap between humans and animals. A year on, the mission had been abandoned. The Fuegian they had named Jemmy Button lived like the other natives, had a wife, and had no wish to return to England. Darwin experienced an earthquake in Chile and saw signs that the land had just been raised, including mussel beds stranded above high tide. High in the Andes he saw seashells, and several fossil trees that had grown on a sand beach. He theorized that as the land rose, oceanic islands sank, and coral reefs round them grew to form atolls. On the geologically new Galapagos Islands, Darwin looked for evidence attaching wildlife to an older center of creation, and found mockingbirds allied to those in Chile but differing from island to island. He heard that slight variations in the shape of tortoise shells showed which island they came from, but failed to collect them, even after eating tortoises taken on board as food. In Australia, the marsupial rat kangaroo and the platypus seemed so unusual that Darwin thought it was almost as though 2 distinct creators had been at work. He found the Aborigines good-humored and pleasant, and noted their depletion by European settlement. The Beagle investigated how the atolls of the Cocos, Keeling, Islands had formed, and the survey supported Darwin's theorizing. Fitzroy began writing the official narrative of the Beagle voyages, and after reading Darwin's diary he proposed incorporating it into the account. Darwin's journal was eventually rewritten as a separate 3rd volume, on natural history. In Cape Town, Darwin and Fitzroy met John Herschel, who had recently written to Lyell praising his uniformitarianism as opening bold speculation on that mystery of mysteries, the replacement of extinct species by others, as a natural in contradistinction to a miraculous process. When organizing his notes as the ship sailed home, Darwin wrote that, if his growing suspicions about the mockingbirds, the tortoises and the Falkland Islands fox were correct, such facts undermine the stability of species, then cautiously added, would, before, undermine. He later wrote that such facts seemed to me to throw some light on the origin of species. Inception of Darwin's evolutionary theory. When the Beagle reached Falmouth, Cornwall, on the 2nd of October 1836, Darwin was already a celebrity in scientific circles as in December 1835 Henslow had fostered his former pupil's reputation by giving selected naturalists a pamphlet of Darwin's geological letters. Darwin visited his home in Shrewsbury and saw relatives, then hurried to Cambridge to see Henslow, who advised him on finding naturalists available to catalogue the collections and agreed to take on the botanical specimens. Darwin's father organized investments, enabling his son to be a self-funded gentleman scientist, and an excited Darwin went round the London institutions being feted and seeking experts to describe the collections. Zoologists had a huge backlog of work, and there was a danger of specimens just being left in storage. Charles Lyell eagerly met Darwin for the first time on the 29th of October and soon introduced him to the up-and-coming anatomist Richard Owen, who had the facilities of the Royal College of Surgeons to work on the fossil bones collected by Darwin. Owen's surprising results included other gigantic extinct ground sloths as well as the Megatherium, a near-complete skeleton of the unknown Celidotherium, and a hippopotamus-sized rodent-like skull named Toxodon resembling a giant capybara. The armor fragments were actually from Glyptodon, a huge armadillo-like creature as Darwin had initially thought. These extinct creatures were related to living species in South America. In mid-December, Darwin took lodgings in Cambridge to organize work on his collections and rewrite his journal. He wrote his first paper, showing that the South American landmass was slowly rising, and with Lyell's enthusiastic backing read it to the Geological Society of London on the 4th of January 1837. On the same day, he presented his mammal and bird specimens to the Zoological Society. The ornithologist John Gould soon announced that the Galapagos birds that Darwin had thought a mixture of blackbirds, grosbeaks, and finches, were, in fact, 12 separate species of finches. On the 17th of February, Darwin had thought a mixture of blackbirds, grosbeaks, and finches, were, in fact, 12 separate species of finches. On the 17th of February, Darwin was elected to the Council of the Geological Society, and Lyell's presidential address presented Owen's findings on Darwin's fossils, stressing geographical continuity of species as supporting his uniformitarian ideas. Early in March, Darwin moved to London to be near this work, joining Lyell's social circle of scientists and experts such as Charles Babbage, who described God as a programmer of laws. Darwin stayed with his freethinking brother Erasmus, part of this Whig circle and a close friend of the writer Harriet Martineau, who promoted Malthusianism underlying the controversial Whig Poor Law reforms to stop welfare from causing overpopulation and more poverty. As a Unitarian, she welcomed the radical implications of transmutation of species, promoted by Grant and younger surgeons influenced by Geoffroy. Transmutation was anathema to Anglicans defending social order, but reputable scientists openly discussed the subject, and there was wide interest in John Herschel's letter praising Lyell's approach as a way to find a natural cause of the origin of new species. Gould met Darwin and told him that the Galapagos mockingbirds from different islands were separate species, not just varieties, and what Darwin had thought was a wren was also in the finch group. Darwin had not labeled the finches by island, but from the notes of others on the Beagle, including Fitzroy, he allocated species to islands. The two rears were also distinct species, and on the 14th of March Darwin announced how their distribution changed going southwards. By mid-March, Darwin was speculating in his red notebook on the possibility that one species does change into another, to explain the geographical distribution of living species such as the rears, and extinct ones such as the strange Macrauchenia, which resembled a giant guanaco. His thoughts on lifespan, asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction developed in his B notebook around mid-July onto variation in offspring, to adapt and alter the race to changing world, explaining the Galapagos tortoises, mockingbirds and rears. He sketched branching descent, then a genealogical branching of a single evolutionary tree, in which it is absurd to talk of one animal being higher than another, discarding Lamarck's independent lineages progressing to higher forms. Overwork, illness, and marriage. While developing this intensive study of transmutation, Darwin became mired in more work. Still rewriting his journal, he took on editing and publishing the expert reports on his collections, and with Henslow's help obtained a Treasury grant of £1,000 to sponsor this multi-volume zoology of the voyage of HMS Beagle, a sum equivalent to about £82,000 in 2014. He stretched the funding to include his planned books on geology, and agreed to unrealistic dates with the publisher. As the Victorian era began, Darwin pressed on with writing his journal, and in August 1837 began correcting printers' proofs. Darwin's health suffered under the pressure. On the 20th of September he had an uncomfortable palpitation of the heart, so his doctors urged him to knock off all work and live in the country for a few weeks. After visiting Shrewsbury he joined his Wedgwood relatives at Maid Hall, Staffordshire, but found them too eager for tales of his travels to give him much rest. His charming, intelligent, and cultured cousin Emma Wedgwood, 9 months older than Darwin, was nursing his invalid aunt. His uncle Jos pointed out an area of ground where cinders had disappeared under loam and suggested that this might have been the work of earthworms, inspiring a new and important theory on their role in soil formation, which Darwin presented at the Geological Society on the 1st of November. William Whewell pushed Darwin to take on the duties of Secretary of the Geological Society. After initially declining the work, he accepted the post in March 1838. Despite the grind of writing and editing the Beagle reports, Darwin made remarkable progress on transmutation, taking every opportunity to question expert naturalists and, unconventionally, people with practical experience such as farmers and pigeon fanciers. Over time, his research drew on information from his relatives and children, the family butler, neighbors, colonists and former shipmates. He included mankind in his speculations from the outset, and on seeing an orangutan in the zoo on the 28th of March 1838 noted its childlike behavior. The strain took a toll, and by June he was being laid up for days on end with stomach problems, headaches and heart symptoms. For the rest of his life, he was repeatedly incapacitated with episodes of stomach pains, vomiting, severe boils, palpitations, trembling and other symptoms, particularly during times of stress, such as attending meetings or making social visits. The cause of Darwin's illness remained unknown, and attempts at treatment had little success. On the 23rd of June, he took a break and went geologizing in Scotland. He visited Glen Roy in glorious weather to see the parallel roads cut into the hillsides at Three Heights. He later published his view that these were marine raised beaches, but then had to accept that they were shorelines of a proglacial lake. Fully recuperated, he returned to Shrewsbury in July. Used to jotting down daily notes on animal breeding, he scrawled rambling thoughts about career and prospects on 2 scraps of paper, one with columns headed, "Marry," and "Not marry." Advantages included, constant companion and a friend in old age, better than a dog anyhow,
Thank you.
against points such as, less money for books, and terrible loss of time. Having decided in favor, he discussed it with his father, then went to visit Emma on the 29th of July. He did not get around to proposing, but against his father's advice he mentioned his ideas on transmutation. Evolutionary social movements. Darwin's fame and popularity led to his name being associated with ideas and movements that, at times, had only an indirect relation to his writings, and sometimes went directly against his express comments. Thomas Malthus had argued that population growth beyond resources was ordained by God to get humans to work productively and show restraint in getting families. This was used in the 1830s to justify workhouses and laissez-faire economics. Evolution was by then seen as having social implications, and Herbert Spencer's 1851 book Social Statics based ideas of human freedom and individual liberties on his Lamarckian evolutionary theory. Soon after The Origin was published in 1859, critics derided his description of a struggle for existence as a Malthusian justification for the English industrial capitalism of the time. The term Darwinism was used for the evolutionary ideas of others, including Spencer's survival of the fittest, as free market progress, and Ernst Haeckel's racist ideas of human development. Writers used natural selection to argue for various, often contradictory, ideologies such as laissez-faire dog-eat-dog capitalism, racism, warfare, colonialism and imperialism. However, Darwin's holistic view of nature included dependence of one being on another. Thus pacifists, socialists, liberal social reformers and anarchists such as Peter Kropotkin stressed the value of cooperation over struggle within a species. Darwin himself insisted that social policy should not simply be guided by concepts of struggle and selection in nature. After the 1880s, a eugenics movement developed on ideas of biological inheritance, and for scientific justification of their ideas appealed to some concepts of Darwinism. In Britain, most shared Darwin's cautious views on voluntary improvement and sought to encourage those with good traits in positive eugenics. During the eclipse of Darwinism, a scientific foundation for eugenics was provided by Mendelian genetics. Negative eugenics to remove the feeble-minded were popular in America, Canada and Australia, and eugenics in the United States introduced compulsory sterilization laws, followed by several other countries. Subsequently, Nazi eugenics brought the field into disrepute. The term, social Darwinism, was used infrequently from around the 1890s, but became popular as a derogatory term in the 1940s when used by Richard Hofstadter to attack the laissez-faire conservatism of those like William Graham Sumner who opposed reform and socialism. Since then, it has been used as a term of abuse by those opposed to what they think are the moral consequences of evolution. Works. Darwin was a prolific writer. Even without publication of his works on evolution, he would have had a considerable reputation as the author of The Voyage of the Beagle, as a geologist who had published extensively on South America and had solved the puzzle of the formation of coral atolls, and as a biologist who had published the definitive work on barnacles. While On the Origin of Species dominates perceptions of his work, The Descent of Man and the Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals had considerable impact, and his books on plants including The Power of Movement in Plants were innovative studies of great importance, as was his final work on the formation of vegetable mold through the action of worms.
Thank you.